Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you.
Hello, Raymond.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you here on Archaeo-Chat. And today I've invited you for a conversation because I saw a news story about a fascinating mortuary house in central Norway. And this thing is right up my alley for a couple of reasons. But also, crucially, I wanted to know more about some of the specifics. And so before we dive into that, can you just introduce yourself and, crucially, what it is that you found?
Yeah. So I'm Raymond Sauvage, and I'm an archaeologist working at the NTNU University Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently conducting large excavation projects because of road developments in central Norway.
Okay.
And we have this quite big site at this place called Bygdøy, where we have a whole leveled burial field dated from the Viking period. That we started excavating this year. And then we also have this occupation area with Viking and Iron Age settlements. And we think that some of these settlements are from the same period as the gravesite, so we have this connection there.
Right.
And on the gravesite, it mainly consists of leveled burial mounds. Maybe we can see 8 of them. These ring ditches, and among these burial mounds there are also several graves that are not marked by any mounds, but they are just normal graves dug into the ground. So we guess we have around 30 graves in total, both cremation and inhumation graves. We also have boat graves that we're working on at the moment. So, but among these, inside 2 of these burial mounds, we found this kind of square features. And the one that we have excavated this year, it's around 5 times 3.5 meters.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And it's exactly in the center of the ring ditch, and the ditch is around 30 centimeters deep, and there was flat stones placed in it to sort of support a wooden wall.
Yeah.
And in the 4 corners we found the fundaments for post holes. So there's been post holes in each 5 corners, and this is quite a substantial building, clearly been placed in the center of a burial mound.
Yeah.
So, and that's quite new to us.
Well, and I suppose that's the thing I was initially most intrigued by here is I suppose there are a couple of elements. And do you mind if I just sort of take you back a couple of steps there?
Yeah.
So I suppose first of all, for I guess for the folks at home initially, what is a standard sort of Iron Age Viking burial? Is there a standard? Because you've mentioned inhumations and cremations, and obviously the grandest imaginings that we have tend to revolve around being floated out to sea or something like that in a Hollywood movie. So what is a standard burial, and therefore I suppose how does this building stand out from that?
Yeah. It's a bit difficult question, because it seems like, especially in the Viking period, that the diversity of burial customs is quite big. We see both cremations and inhumations in the same period, and we don't really know if there is social differences or cultural traditions playing this variation. But I would guess normal. Also, the burial mound is the norm for the Viking Age burial, especially for people that own free farmers. They were buried in burial mounds.
Yeah.
And that goes from smaller mounds with one grave. If there's a man that's been buried there, it'll be probably with his weapon set, and if there's a woman with oval brooches, and it goes all the way up, to Oseberg and Gokstad, like this very big, fancy burial.
Yeah.
But, so we are sort of in the normal range of these Viking burial costumes.
Okay, and so incidentally, it's one of my lifetime ambitions to go and see the Oseberg ship. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
One day, but so in that sense, then it's not necessarily that people say who are say poorer can't afford a burial and therefore they're cremated. It could simply be family tradition or individual religious rite, or basically there's no standardized mandated way of being buried. No. Okay.
Really, and that's one of the things maybe that we will try to explore in this project is the variation.
Yeah.
Where the mortuary houses is one of these elements within this variation, and we don't know yet what function it had.
Well, and I suppose that was what I was curious about. Why do you think someone would build essentially what seems like because a 5 by 5.3 meter space isn't that big? It's about the same size as my office, I suppose, actually.
Yeah.
And I imagine that in there, if you are doing rites linked with human remains, or the storage, or the communing with those remains, this is not presumably not something that lots of people can access at the same time. So what's going on there? Why would you do that? Are we possibly looking at one family, or is this something that lots of people could come in and out of? Any ideas at the moment?
Yeah, I'm sort of working up from this hypothesis that the house has been accessible after the construction of the mound, because it seems that there has been some sort of doorway into it. But of course, there's some sort of guesswork within this, especially since we don't have the actual burial. It's been leveled away. But
leveled away by the mortuary structure, then, by the house building.
No, by later agricultural activity.
Oh, of course, yes. Okay, so yes, I see.
Yeah. So, but it may be some sort of connection to a family, because to me it seems like we have this ring ditch with this mortuary house. And around the mortuary house, we found several older graves, like 50, 100 years older.
Right.
So, and there seems like to be some sort of cluster around this. So maybe this mound was connected to one family, or one period of a family. So that's a possibility, but of course we have to work along different hypotheses here. So
you have to, I suppose, follow the evidence in that sense. Yeah.
Because we have simultaneously, we also have both graves on the same site.
Well, and so is there? Because I've read a couple of articles where I think it was possibly you being quoted. I certainly read in quotation marks this notion that for some people maybe there was the ideal of being carried off to the afterlife in a boat, and for some people maybe the mortuary structure could double as that feature, and I'm wondering how are you going to try and establish that as a potential function, or even discount that as a function, if that's what I mean. Is there any way that you can proceed, sort of theoretically speaking, to compare this to other sites, perhaps?
I think it will be mainly doing comparison to other finds, especially since we don't have the actual remains of the person or any of the grave goods. But I find this idea of a person could be gifted an actual house in the grave quite intriguing. And then maybe it's a parallel to this boat's grave costume. Maybe they, because there are some written, that's maybe one line of investigation could be to go to the written and saga sources, and also sort of these mythical sources from Icelandic and some scores in Norwegian traditions, that people actually got these burial houses constructed, and they furnitured it, and they went into it and let themselves be buried alive there.
Yeah, okay.
I guess it's some sort of exaggeration, but there may be some element of truth there.
Yeah, yeah.
And that could be one way of, to go a little bit further in these interpretations.
Is it possible? Because obviously, if you're talking about saga evidence, I mean, there's things like Draugr kind of coming back and haunting houses and basically harassing the living by infesting or climbing over structures and this kind of thing. Is there any way that this sort of thing could be trying to placate the dead and say, look, you have your house and we'll have our house, and you stay there, and we won't bother you, this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I think there's been some research done by Marianne Hem Eriksen here in Norway. She's been studying houses and the symbolic meaning of doorways, sort of. So, and there was this tradition that you had to carry out the body not through the doorway, but through a hole in the wall, because otherwise the dead could come back. And so maybe there's some sort of parallel here, that if you inherit the dead inside a building with a door, you just sort of lock him, him or her inside it. Yeah,
potentially.
It's an exciting.
Well, it's also, it's an interesting. It's always interested me, this idea that somehow the dead will, as you say, it's possible to confuse someone who has just been alive by taking them out in an unconventional way, say through the wall or through a window or something, or for example locking them away in a structure. This must say something as well about how the veil of death seemingly influenced the relationship between the living and the dead, because there's veneration, there's a respect there, but also seemingly there's some understanding that perhaps the dead won't understand the rules of, say, crossing a threshold or going through a doorway. How do you think that played out? I mean, for example, can you imagine feeling comfortable depositing your loved one in that sort of space, in so much as if it is a chamber to contain a dangerous or a potentially malevolent or confused entity in that sense?
It's a difficult question. I don't think I have a very good answer, but
sorry.
But I get your meaning, and I think that there's a clearly the transition from a dead body, from a biological death to a social death. That's like it's like these two steps.
Yeah.
First, the body is dead, and but it's through the burial rites and placing the dead body maybe inside his house. We can kind of imagine that this would help, that sort of passing this threshold. Like you're into, and maybe also they could sort of access the body there to do rites that would help to the dead to continue his transition.
Yeah.
Maybe so for the society to accept that it's not only the body that's dead, but it's actually the whole person. Is dead. I think it's a two-step there.
Well, and I suppose it reminds me of a couple of things. I suppose one of them would be the parallel with I mean, as you mentioned, grave goods such as, say, weapons. So it's clear that sometimes weapons would be deposited and therefore taken out of society, or they would even be actively destroyed, bent in some way, such that no one else was really allowed to handle this apart from the person who had died. But also something else occurs to me, and that is the universal truth. That is, we only conduct funerals really for the living. If you know what I mean. So actually, the dead who we are depositing, even though there may be a social notion that perhaps they are that there's some sort of transition or danger or change occurring, we also need to remember that this theatre is for the people probably who either stood outside the house, or for people who occasionally get to visit the house, I suppose. And I guess so do you think that these rites could be to do with, as you say, this idea of perhaps, I guess we would say, saying goodbye in the modern world, wouldn't we? This kind of thing, you know. Is that possibly what's going on, do you think?
Yeah. I think it's quite possible, because this building would actually, it's sort of different because you actually can access the body after its death. Not so it's not like when you bury inside a closed mound or inside the earth, you can't access the body anymore.
No.
But, so maybe this says something about which position this deceased had in his community.
Yeah.
We're sort of playing along this idea that this could be, and it would be because of this. If we go along with the idea that the house, the mortuary house, was sort of try to keep the dead staying inside its mound. This may be some sort of show that this person was important to the farm or the settlement. Maybe it's one of the key founders of the settlement, or someone who did important service. Like he was a famous warrior and something, and came back with huge riches and made allies with the kings. So to keep him at the farm, it could bring luck. And we have this tradition in Norwegian mythology, and that people actually, they could go to the grave mounds and talk to the deceased. And they put out food, and so if you were wondering about an important question, you can go and sit on the burial mound and wonder for a couple of days, and then you came up with an important answer with help from the deceased forefather or foremother inside the mound. So maybe the house could be seen within this context.
Actually, I like that, and also I quite like this idea that that you kind of want to anchor this special person to that spot, and also either one of two things, I guess. You either want to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to stay, so you can visit them in this world where maybe they can wander off or be displeased. But also, I wonder, and I don't know if this is too cheeky a thought, but I wonder whether it's possible that someone would mediate access to that wisdom, if you see what I mean. Would there be someone who's kind of essentially saying, well, if you wanted to ask this revered ancestor a question, then I'll take a sandwich and you can go in, and is that possible? Because I suppose one of the big frustrations that I and also obviously colleagues have over the years is this idea that it's really hard to know the specifics of the mediation of religious practice in Iron Age Scandinavia. So, for example, there's not the equivalent of a priest and a bishop and this kind of structure that you see, say, in the church at the time. And so I wonder how acceptable it would have been to have someone who is in a very workaday relationship, mediating and I suppose tending the house, but also limiting or even profiting, dare I say, from access to the house. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think we should keep our minds open to the possibility. And of course, this is very difficult to establish this kind of practice through archaeology. But I think it's quite an intriguing thought, and we know a little bit about religious practices. We know that there were, especially magic practices, connection to women. With textile working as a part of religious practice. So we know some through the written sources. So, but to connect it with the archaeology, that's the difficult part.
Yeah. Okay.
But a building certainly opens for the possibility that a certain person could have access, and it isn't necessary that everyone had access to this house. Maybe it was reserved for this special kind of person who had this role in society.
Yeah. Or once a year, or some other significant time. I suppose just from a practical angle, how much time are you actually able to dedicate to this particular find, given that it's part of essentially civil engineering? I mean, so is this a case of you've come across this, but okay, we'll have to look at that in a bit because we're still looking at the rest of the road, kind of thing. How's that in terms of your day-to-day work, life quality?
Actually, we're quite lucky because we have the site had been surveyed for 20 years ago.
Right.
It's just now that the road construction is started, will be starting in a couple of years. So we have still 2 years to go until the road development catches up with us.
Okay.
So we will have this year we excavated this first mortuary house, and we have another one that we will keep until next year, because we are closing down our site in a couple of weeks because of snow and winter. And we will start again in May, and then maybe we can come back a little bit more prepared about how we should interpret and which kind of samples we should do. So we will have enough time to examine it very thorough.
Excellent, cool. So presumably your winter is going to be taken up with lots of mortuary house research then.
Oh yeah. Of course, we have all these other exciting graves also. So
of course,
it will take much of our time this winter.
Wonderful, cool. Well, we all need something to get ourselves through the dark days of winter.
Oh yeah, really.
Okay, well, it's been a real pleasure catching up with you on this, and I sense that this is going to be an interpretation that evolves and will probably change over time. So would it be okay to touch base with you again at some point and hear more about this? If it's
sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We'll have more information.
Wonderful.
More to chat about. Yeah.
Okay. Just one last question. As an archaeologist working in Norway, what would you want people, say, in the rest of the world to think about when they think of Iron Age Scandinavian burial rites, this kind of thing? So do you ever get frustrated that people always think of boats and boat burials, or like what's a little secret that you want more people to know more about?
Actually, I quite this assumption that people got buried in boats that they sent out to sea and fire to it. We have no evidence for that.
no, exactly.
Buried in mounds or in the soil. So, like, my main message would be to sort of clean up these assumptions about how Viking burials was. They wasn't normally they wasn't that spectacular as in the movies. And you had from poor to rich.
Okay. I suppose the equivalent would be in 1500 years' time, people imagining that your standard, say, Western Christian burial or whatever involved someone being put into a glass lift that then was ceremonially pulled upwards towards the heavens. It's that kind of like, well, no, you don't. We haven't got the resources to waste on burning a ship. No, we're going to bury them, and it's going to be often boat shaped, but that'll be enough. Okay, cool, excellent. Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your time.
It's
this
been
morning.
A pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you, and and I'll definitely keep tabs. Cheers. Take care.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.